Rishi Sunak's campaign to be the next Tory leader is dead in the water. Tory members don't like him, and his claim to be the most electable candidate has floundered after a series of dud debates. But the former Chancellor isn't going to go down gracefully, and as he fights for breath in a doomed contest, he's taken a predictable turn. A sharp one to the right. The pitch has included swingeing tax cuts.
I've always said that we need to help people with the cost of living over this autumn and winter. So on top of the plans I announced as Chancellor to get people £1,200 of help, now that bills are going to be higher than we thought, it's right that we go further. And as Prime Minister, what I want to do is cut VAT on energy bills to provide a little bit of extra help for people over the autumn and winter. But today I've been setting out my radical vision for where I want to take the economy after we get inflation under control. I want to cut income tax by 20%. That's one of the most far-reaching cuts to income tax that we've seen. We'll do that responsibly over time, continuing to reduce our borrowing, and we'll do it by growing the economy, taking advantage of our Brexit freedoms, and getting our businesses to invest more and innovate more through the tax reforms that I'm going to put in place.
That's a massive U-turn. Sunak has spent the whole campaign so far attacking Liz Truss for unfunded tax cuts. Now he's promising the biggest income tax cut in 30 years. Of course, tax cuts will mean less money for services, so a Sunak premiership would damage us all. But the damage from Sunak's right turn would not be felt equally, and the usual suspects have found themselves scapegoated in Rishi's campaign. First up are, you guessed it, immigrants to Britain. No prizes if you got that one correctly. On this front, Sunak has promised to increase the number of deportations, winning him headlines like this in the Express: Sunak, I'll kick 5,600 foreign criminals out of Britain. So how will he do this? Well, at the moment, a foreign national who serves a jail sentence of 12 months or more can be considered for deportation. Sunak wants to lower the threshold to 6 months, meaning that people risk deportation for relatively minor crimes like shoplifting low-value items. It also means that someone could be deported on the basis of a sentence handed down by a magistrate rather than a judge. It's all incredibly grim, but Sunak is not the first person to have come up with this idea. The Guardian report this. The idea of halving the sentence threshold for deporting overseas offenders has been considered by the Home Office under Priti Patel, but has not been taken forward in part because it was felt those jailed for relatively minor offences would often be able to thwart deportation under human rights laws. Which is presumably why Sunak has set his sights on human rights legislation.
We clearly have a problem with human rights law in this country that is making it difficult for us to achieve our objectives. That's why we're passing a British Bill of Rights, which will help with all of these things. That's why I've suggested moving away from the ECHR definition of asylum to the Refugee Convention definition, which is still an international legal standard, but narrower. If we do these things, we will be able to make progress on this problem.
So when it comes to asylum, the fact that we have too many human rights means too many people get in. And when it comes to deportation, it means that not enough people get thrown out. How irritating for the Tories that we have to treat human beings with human rights. Migrants are not the only group to get caught in the crosshairs of Rishi's dying campaign, though. This is a quote from a speech he gave this weekend. What's the point in stopping the bulldozers in the Greenbelt if we allow left-wing agitators to take a bulldozer to our history, our traditions, and our fundamental values? Whether it's pulling down statues of historic figures, replacing the school curriculum with anti-British propaganda, or rewriting the English language so we can't even use words like man, woman, or mother without being told we're offending someone. It's not us who are the aggressors. We have zero interest in fighting a so-called culture war, but we are determined to end the brainwashing, the vandalism, and the finger-pointing. Too often, existing legislation is used to engage in social engineering to which no one has given consent. The worst offender in this regard is the 2010 Equality Act, conceived in the dog days of the last Labour government. It has been a Trojan horse that has allowed every kind of woke nonsense to permeate public life. It must stop. My government would review the Act to ensure we keep legitimate protections while stopping mission creep. Our laws must protect free speech, block biological men from competing in women's sport, and ensure that children are allowed to be children. Ash, that's a lot of dog whistles and a lot of scapegoats to fit into a couple of paragraphs. What do you make of this turn by Rishi Sunak? It's kind of desperate, also kind of scary.
Did Julia Hartley Brewer write this? I mean, in particular, that last paragraph about women's sports and single-sex spaces and allowing children to be children. The only thing that I can really think of applies to the allow children to be children thing is maybe this relatively new American import of a moral panic about children being taken to drag queen library reading hours. That's the only one that I can really think of. And if that is the kind of reference that Rishi Sunak is making, that points towards a real pivot towards a very, very online, very radicalized section of the far right. Because it's not kind of, your envelope stuffing, Shire Tories who are storming into libraries, filming everybody and calling people pedophiles. That's kind of your QAnon, really quite freaky deaky old men side of things. So the fact that that's where he's aiming his dog whistles is frightening and it is worrying. This does reek of desperation for Rishi Sunak. He knows that he can't compete with Liz Truss. He's somehow fallen into the trap of being held responsible for all the things that the Tory membership didn't like about Boris Johnson, whilst also being hauled over coals for being perceived as the biggest traitor to Boris Johnson. He's also boxed himself in, I think, by saying to people, hang on, here's an economic orthodoxy and I'm sticking to it, whereas Liz Truss is like, tax cuts, you can have as many as you want. I don't care. I don't have to pay for it. And so I think that real lack of optimism has meant that he's instead opted for the most reactionary possible form of politics, of course, punching down at immigrants and at trans people and at waving his arms madly at the Daily Express going, please notice me, dear God, please notice me. So yeah, you're right. It is pathetic. But in terms of what it then launders into mainstream conservative opinion, that is something that's worrying. And as we've seen over the past few years, that firewall between the traditional electoral right wing in this country and the, street thuggish far right of the right wing in this country has totally broken down. We saw that around Brexit, and now we're continuing to see it if Rishi Sunak is making these references to, the far right storming libraries to, tell children they're not allowed to hear we're going on a bear hunt from someone in a red wig and a silver dress, which is nuts.
I'm still just in awe at the really clunky segue of what's the point in stopping the bulldozers in the Greenbelt if we allow left-wing agitators to take a bulldozer to our history, our traditions, and our fundamental values? Those things have nothing to do with each other. Apart from, I suppose, this is both like hating young people, because protecting the Greenbelt, I mean, I don't think this is the real problem with the housing crisis, but one of the effects of protecting the Greenbelt, which hasn't shrunk, by the way, in the past few decades, is that house prices will remain expensive for the Tory base. You're saying, what's the point in keeping houses expensive if young people still get to have some cultural expression? We have to make them poor and we have to silence them. We have to take on young people on every single front.